Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of our program From Rome tonight. I'm Christiana Amanpour. And what more timely or more important moment to make this rare visit to the Quirinale, the presidential palace recently opened up to the public by the new president, Sergio Mattarella. Now, his is a largely ceremonial role, but one of his first and sad duties will be to preside over prayers and funerals and to comfort a nation in mourning and in shock. Even at his inauguration last month, in a blaze of pomp and ceremony, it was clear that 73-year-old Mattarella would be a very different kind of Italian president.
Onori al Presidente della Repubblica!
Vowing to tackle Italy's deep economic crisis, to root out corruption, and perhaps most of all, his own amazing story and accidental catapulting into politics puts him in a place like no other Italian leader to tackle that most Italian of blights, the mafia. Soft-spoken, but with a core of steel, we started talking about the fight against ISIS. Mr. President, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining me.
Grazie, benvenuta.
Thank you, welcome.
We sit and talk on a very sad day for you and for all of Italy, the day after Italian tourists were among the dead in Tunisia. What is your reaction to what happened? How dangerous is North Africa today to your country?
What happened yesterday in Tunisia is very sorrowful and also very alarming, and it shows that ISIS is a very serious danger which has to be tackled urgently because we don't have much time. The persecution of Christians in the Middle East and in some countries in Central Africa is very worrying too. What happened showed the serious nature of this danger. In actual fact, it is truly disconcerting to see claims of heroism for the act of shooting on defenseless people. This seems to me to be the highest level of barbarity there can be. ISIS, like all fundamentalist terrorism, is the new, true danger for civilization and democracy and human rights. It is no coincidence that yesterday in Tunis, Parliament and a museum were attacked. Democracy and culture.
How dangerous is what is happening in Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, for Italy?
What we are most worried about, apart from the event yesterday in Tunisia, is the situation in Libya, which is a reason for alarm for a number of reasons. First of all, for that country itself, because Libyan citizens are forced to live in a situation of chaos and in the fear of civil war. Furthermore, ISIS is spreading inside Libya, and there is the risk of it transforming that country into a basis for its terrorist activities into Europe. And finally, the chaos there is in Libya helps traffickers of human beings who send out to sea so many men and women and children, exposing them to huge risks while earning huge amounts of money. And the international community certainly has to support the resources of the UN and the UN envoy so that a ceasefire can be achieved and a true Libyan government can be established.
Your Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi, has said that there needs to be an international force to combat this terrorism, particularly in Libya, and that Italy would be part of one if the UN or NATO decided to do that. Do you agree?
What Prime Minister Renzi said was that a UN intervention is necessary, and this is something which is underway so as to establish a government in Libya which can pacify the country, and immediately after the establishment of this Libyan government, the UN and the international community should help that government to become stable in order to improve the situation in Libya. We're talking about a peaceful intervention. Italy is willing to take part in a UN operation once a Libyan government is established which can allow a ceasefire to take place.
I want to ask you about a different form of terrorism, the kind that you have personally experienced, the terrorism of organized crime in your own country. The mafia is something that you have vowed to combat. Tell me about how you personally were affected by it.
Well, my brother was a national executive of the Christian Democrat Party. He was president of the Sicilian region when in 1980 he was assassinated by the mafia because he was opposing their interests and their influence. This obviously, we were very close, is something which was a great blow for me. Because of this, but not only because of this, I've always been convinced that fighting the mafia is a central and a decisive issue. Civil awareness against the mafia has grown a great deal in Italy and in Sicily. We have achieved important results, also thanks to the action of many Sicilians who acted against the mafia very bravely, many of whom were murdered. And I would like to recall that people who are greatly respected, like Giovanni Falcone or Paolo Borsellino, were Sicilians, as were many other members of the judiciary, members of the police forces, journalists, politicians, unionists who fought bravely against the mafia and became victims of the mafia. But this action, this commitment, this bravery, these sacrifices led to a surge in public opinion against the mafia.
Mr. President, I'm sure it's hard to talk about this, but the way your brother was killed was brazen. I think they came up to his car and fired directly at him. And you were there at the very end. I believe he died in your arms. Can you tell me about that moment, that day?
Well, it's something I've never done, actually. He was in his car, and he was going to Mass with his wife and his children, and an assassin approached the car and shot him, despite the fact that the wife of my brother was trying to protect his head with her hands, and she was also wounded. I was immediately called by one of my nephews, and I went down straight away, and I took him to the hospital, but there was no chance of saving him. He was already dead. And this obviously is a memory which is very painful for me.
You've seen the danger firsthand to confronting organized crime and the mafia. We've just described your own brother as a victim and others who've taken them on. Are you worried for your own safety, for your own life? Because you still want to combat organized crime.
Well, in all these years, I've always tried to emphasize and to promote the need to combat the mafia, because it is a cancer which is oppressive and which stifles everybody's freedom and reduces the possibility for the areas in which it's present to prosper and to develop. Obviously, there are always dangers, but if one has respect for one's own dignity as a person and for one's role, it's something which you need to do anyway. Now I've got very good protection, of course, but in previous years that was not the case, and I've met many people who, even though they knew that they were exposed to great danger, acted very bravely against the mafia.
What about Italy's economic situation? It's one of the countries deeply affected by the economic crisis. There's a lot of austerity that's been demanded. How is it affecting the fabric of society here? The unemployment, you know, the difficult and fragile economic situation?
Well, yes, the crisis has produced really serious effects in Italy because it's led to huge unemployment. It has led to an increase in inequalities. It's led to difficulties in many areas of society for many people. And this is something which has to be in the foreground for politicians and representatives and institutions in my country. The situation is beginning to show signs of improvement. The economic figures are beginning to be encouraging, or at least they seem to be becoming encouraging, but the situation is still very difficult. There is extensive unemployment, particularly young people face great difficulties, and this is something which is leading the Italian government and also the European Union to work for economic growth in order to stimulate employment and in order to respond to the sacrifice people have undertaken in recent years.
Italy had a very good program, Mare Nostrum, to try to save all of these people who are trafficked or sent on the high seas trying to get here. Now it's been reduced to a Triton program, which is not saving people on the high seas. Do you think Mare Nostrum should be reintroduced? Should Italy, the Europeans, be more concerned about saving lives than saving costs?
Well, this is, if we go back to Mare Nostrum, is something which the government will need to decide on and Parliament will need to decide on. What we can say is that we're very proud of Mare Nostrum. Our Navy saved many, many lives in the Mediterranean. And it was not, Mare Nostrum was not, in fact, as many people feared, a pull factor which would increase the arrivals of migrants, because in recent months with the Triton operation there's been an increase of 60% in the number of landings, so it wasn't Mare Nostrum which was causing the arrival of migrants. The fact is that migrants come because they leave their land, their homes, because of wars, because of persecution, because of famine, and these are people, men, women and children who come to Europe because in Europe they see a place of democracy and freedom. Europe must live up to its history and to its responsibilities too with regard to these people who arrive. The first requirement is to save them at sea, but we also need to welcome them.
President Mattarella, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
I thank you.